Imagine this, you have an exam tomorrow, so naturally you open up your notes so that you can review them. But once you open up your notes, you found that most of them is actually useless. You don't understand half of what you've written, and there's 50 pages of notes. So you try reading them painfully, but then eventually you give up. And you try doing some practice questions, but you cannot do them because you can't understand your notes. So you give up on studying and you tell yourself that you're just not good at this. If this sounds like you, my friends, then you're doing it wrong. It's absolutely crazy that schools don't teach us how to take notes, because I think notes are absolutely fundamental for success in school. Notes are what separates the high achievers from the rest of the mediocre students. And personally, I've been lucky enough to be on the other side, so I know how the high achievers think and how they take notes. So in this video, I will share a few tips of how I take notes. So by the end of this video, you will know exactly how to take notes so that you ace every single one of your exams. So without further ado, let's get straight into tip number 1. As ironic as it may sound, tip number 1 is to try not to take notes. So when you're in a class, when you're learning something, it is important that your brain has to process what is going on, and it is important that your brain has to work hard. So when you hear information from the teacher, you should give your brain some time to process it before writing it down. But what most students do is they write down the information immediately after it comes out of the teacher's mouth. What this does is it offloads the pressure from the brain into the paper. So if you take notes as soon as the teacher say it, then your brain will be working hard and you won't really be learning anything much. So you should aim to use your notes as an extension of your brain, not as a replacement. Think of it this way. If you're at the gym and you lift 2 less weight, then you won't be gaining any muscle. This is the same as offloading every information into the paper without it processing in the brain. So your brain is working 2 less and you're not learning anything. On the other hand, if you lift too much weights at the gym, then you're gonna get injured. And this is the same as not writing any notes at all. So the key really is to find that perfect way for you, to find that perfect spot in the middle, so that in your class you should have this chunk of information processing in your brain. And as soon as it gets too much, then you offload it to the paper. So what I do for almost every class is I completely close my notes in the beginning. And when the teacher starts teaching, my goal is to try to remember and understand everything. But as soon as it gets too much, that's when I open my notes and take them. Tip number 2 is to listen more than you write. Your brain cannot process information as you're writing it down. So when you hear new information, your brain should process it first. Your brain should ask questions, your brain should make connections. And if you're writing the information down, you simply cannot handle 2 tasks at once. So in the classroom, I try to listen and make eye contact with the teacher as much as possible. What this does, it makes me connect to the teacher more. It makes me understand what they're saying in a deeper manner. And it honestly makes class a lot less stressful because you don't have to worry about noting every single thing down. And you can trust your brain more to remember what you hear. The third tip is to understand linear and non-linear note-taking. So linear note-taking is like how your textbook is arranged. You take notes in a chronological order and you list down bullet points as soon as you hear new information. So your notes would be very arranged, very neat and packed, and it would be more like a textbook. But non-linear note-taking is like, it's not like anything because it's very messy. Non-linear note-taking is when you write everything down on a piece of paper without having any kind of order. So everything is just floating around and you're making connections, you're having diagrams, you're drawing lines and arrows, and everything is just messier. But as crazy as it sounds, non-linear note-taking is actually more effective than linear note-taking. This is because you're making connections on a topic that seems unconnected. And by making more connections, by drawing more arrows, your brain will have this mental image of what you're learning and you will be able to remember it super well. So what I do is, instead of taking notes on a portrait paper, I try to do it horizontally. So this prevents me from listing everything down because there's lesser space, but it forces me to take notes more like a mind map so I can have different connections between topics and everything is just floating around like a big image. Before I continue this video, please consider subscribing to my channel because we're trying to reach 25 subscribers as fast as we can. I'm sure you've heard this a million times before already, but handwriting doesn't matter when you're taking notes. I see lots of people out there making super pretty notes with bubbles and colors and all of those pretty little decorations. But the truth is, it really doesn't matter. It's not going to help you learn any more information. So if you're focused too much on your handwriting or on decorations in your classroom, you may be missing what the teacher is trying to say. So handwriting doesn't matter and you can focus less on it. Another bonus tip that I want to share is you can use humor in your notes. Humor makes you remember things more and it adds that personal touch to it. If you hear a specific word that your teacher is saying and something funny comes to your mind, then make sure you write that down because you're definitely going to remember it for a very long time. And the last bonus tip that I want to share is you don't have to do perfect note-taking every single time. On some days, you may be just tired, and we've all been there. Maybe you had a rough night or you slept late or whatever, but you don't have to be having this perfect note-taking mindset every time. It's perfectly okay for you to blindly copy what the teacher is saying because you can always catch up on it later. And just generally don't make note-taking a stressful thing because it's really not stressful. It's okay for you to relax in your class sometimes. You don't always have to be the perfect students. You can always catch up later. So those were the 3 note-taking tips that I wanted to share. Hopefully by trusting your brain to remember the information a bit more and by making eye contact and listening to the teacher and by using non-linear note-taking, you'll be able to remember a lot more of what you learned without making note-taking too stressful.